All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations here at Marquette University Law School, where we talk with news and policy makers. We've been featuring the major candidates for governor. Last week, Tom Barrett was here on Thursday, I believe, and today we are joined by one of the Republican candidates for governor, Milwaukee County Executive Scott Walker. Please give him a warm welcome to Marquette Law School. First of all, I want to say thank you to coming today. Of course, we have rain outside, and then there's that matter of Marquette playing at 1 o'clock this afternoon. We are not going to end early, though. We will go to 1:15. You're not going to miss much. I mean, it's the first 2 or 3 minutes of the game. So, anyhow, I thought I'd begin by asking you essentially the same question I asked Mayor Barrett, and it's to get an understanding of what's motivating you, why you're running. You flirted with a run back in 2006 and then decided to yield to Mark Green. Mm-hmm. But you decided this time around you were in, and you were in pretty early. Mm-hmm. What's driving you?
Well, last April, like a lot of folks across the state, I looked at what was happening in the state with the government and the state as a whole, and I just wasn't satisfied. I saw the growing tax burden, the growing regulatory burden. I saw the impact I believe it was having on our state's economy, and felt that somebody needed to step in and turn around the government. The bright side of things is in this state, you know, the workforce is still one of the best in the world. Our employers many times are 2 or 3 or 4 generations deep of family-owned businesses. Our resources are some of the best in the world. So all the things you need to have a great state and a great place to do business are here. What was really getting in the way of that was the size and cost of our government. And so I thought if someone could ultimately lead forward and change that, we could get this state working again.
You've been an admirer of former President Reagan, and we're all familiar with the comment about government not being the solution, government being the problem. Do you think that's true in Wisconsin? Is government the problem in this state?
Absolutely. I'll give you a specific example. Last February, Governor Doyle and the legislature enacted something called combined reporting, a new tax increase on a number of major employers in this state. One of those employers was right here in our backyard. Harley-Davidson Motor Company took a charge of $22.5 million. Not long after that, Harley laid off another 480 workers. To me, that's a good example of where when government grows too big and taxes too much, it stands directly in the way of the private sector creating and maintaining, in this case, jobs in this state. I think smaller government is better government. I think fundamentally you shouldn't spend more money than you have, and I think most importantly, people create jobs, not the government.
What shouldn't government be doing, in your opinion? In Wisconsin, what is it currently doing that it shouldn't be doing?
Well, you look at particular programs. I think if you look at things like the Wisconsin Shares program, which is the child care component that we've heard all about the excesses of, we've seen the growing list of Badger Care. Both of those were programs in the 90s that were enacted coming off of W-2, the move to welfare reform. Both of those were time limited when they were first put in, but today, after years of this governor, he's lifted those time limits, and they both become permanent entitlements. I think that discourages people from going into the workplace. It makes it very difficult. In the cases of Wisconsin Shares, it opened the door to major fraud and abuse in that system, in some cases even worse than the welfare it once replaced.
Would you eliminate something like Badger Care?
Wouldn't eliminate it. I'd streamline it down so that you had time limits on things of that nature, and so that you really were helping people who need get into the workforce, have a temporary stepping stone, which is what it was originally intended to do.
We'll come back to this subject in a couple of minutes, but obviously the big issue in this campaign is jobs. In fact, when people ask me about what are the top 3 issues, I say jobs, jobs, and jobs,
sure.
Which is what you hear. I know that. Let's talk about where we are today. There's a story in the Christian Science Monitor today about this being a lost decade for 12 different states in this country. Wisconsin is one of them. What they said in the story is that we now have fewer jobs in the state than we did 10 years ago. In fact, fewer jobs than we had, I think, all the way back till 1995. The question is, how do we change that?
Sure.
And what would you do specifically to try and change that?
Yeah, and it's actually probably one of the best issues to talk about in this campaign in terms of comparison. I'll tell you what I do and how I think that compares with Mayor Barrett, because I don't think there could be a starker contrast between the two of us. Clearly, we've set out, we talked about it on your TV show, about our goal of helping the private sector create 250,000 jobs by the end of our first term. The simple way we do that, 6-point plan, in fact, it's up on our website. We've got a whole special website, 250,000jobs.org, which talks about the 6 points of that plan, but it's basically about getting government out of the way so that the cost of doing business is less, which allows businesses to come in. It's lowering the tax burden on individuals, on employers, capping property taxes, phasing out the state tax on retirement income. It's about easing the regulatory burden in the state, which is many of the manufacturers and other businesses I talk to across the state say that as much as the taxes is making it difficult for them to expand jobs here in the state. It's easing the litigation burden. It's making sure we have a truly accountable education system to prepare our workforce, for the next wave of people coming in to the job market out there. It's making sure that we address health care, but not from the standpoint of more government mandates or addressing access as much as it is the cost for our small and mid-sized employers out there. And it's sixth, it's making sure we've got a strong infrastructure system, both the power to fuel the future of the state's economy and making sure we've got an adequate transportation system, having the roads and bridges we need to get products around. That's saying get government out of the way, lowering the cost of doing business so that businesses can do more business in Wisconsin. That's putting our faith in the people who create the jobs. In contrast, Mayor Barrett, as he's talked about even just this week, talked about a goal of 180,000 jobs, and really his primary focus of how to do that is through spending $800 million of taxpayer money to do a rail line between Madison and Milwaukee that even the federal government acknowledges will only create 55 jobs. Now, that's $14.5 million.
Long term, right.
Right,
but
permanent
there would
jobs.
Be construction jobs associated
But
with
I
that.
think the people that we talk about goals for jobs, we want permanent jobs. We don't want temp jobs. We want jobs that will be here 4, 5, 6 years down the road, and that's the target we have with 250,000 jobs. The other big difference is his number is based on the number of jobs that this state has lost, 180,000 jobs during the recession under this governor. The irony is Mayor Barrett is proposing to continue the same exact policies that Jim Doyle has put in place that got us to the point where we lost 180,000 jobs. To me, I think it's real simple for the voters here and across the state, and that is if you think the last 8 years of Jim Doyle's policies has put us in a better position when it comes to the economy, you should vote for Tom Barrett, because what you'll get is a third term of Jim Doyle's policies by electing him as governor. In contrast, I believe those policies have put us in a dire situation, and we need to fundamentally change the policies that have had government, higher taxes, higher spending, higher costs, have driven out more of those jobs, and I want to fundamentally change that.
Let's drill down on some of what you've said there. Maybe we can take these sort of step by step. You talk about lowering taxes, and of course the counter to that is the state is already probably staring at another $2 billion deficit. There is no stimulus money available to help plug the budget gap as we did the last time around. You're talking about eliminating as much as $2 billion in revenue through the getting rid of some of these tax increases that were passed in the last budget. How do the numbers add up? What do you cut if you're going to do that? If you're going to lower rates, something's got to give.
Well, you've got two different parts. I think two parallel strategies. One is you've got to reduce spending. Well, that means individual programs. It even means things as simple as wage and benefit reform, something we've been pushing through at the county level. Because if you don't address that, there's nearly 70,000 state employees, many of which are great public servants, the vast majority of which are that. But when you look at what public sector employees pay for things like health care versus what everybody else in the private sector pays, there's no comparison. That's just not sustainable. That puts government in the same position as a Chrysler or a GM where you just can't sustain that long term. That has got to change. So those are the things you have to control in terms of spending. But I also don't think you can cut your way to prosperity. And by that, that's why we push this overall agenda in terms of lowering taxes, the cost of litigation, the cost of regulation. I think if you boldly and aggressively address those issues, you'll actually see revenue increase into the state treasury, because as more people add more jobs and more people pay, although it be at a lower rate, you'll actually see a higher amount come into the State Department of Revenue. We saw it, you mentioned Ronald Reagan before,
right.
We saw that in the 1980s. When Ronald Reagan's tax cuts were fully enacted in 1983, we had the largest, between 83 and 1990, we had the largest peacetime economic boom in American history. 21 million new jobs were created, 5 million new businesses created, and we actually had more money come into the federal treasury. It wasn't until later in the 80s when the Congress started spending more of that money than what was coming in that we started to see the deficits. But early on, those bold tax cuts actually increased the amount of revenue because more people were working, producing more outcome and more income.
I feel like I'm going to relive some of the conversation we had on our TV show a couple of weeks ago, but
right.
At the risk of being redundant, not everybody watches the show, although you should, you know.
9 o'clock on Sunday mornings, almost everywhere across the state.
It is, yes, that's true, yes. Anyhow, I want
Although you got to move the Green Bay one up. It's at 5:30 in the morning. We got to get
There's a large farm audience for that one, yeah.